So again, this was our very first strip till trial in crop physiology lab history here. And so what did this look like in fall of 23 / spring of 24? So we have 5 treatments here on the left. That is our tillage treatments. So we have, this was a pilot study, so we were trying to compare kind of grower standards here within this trial. So we have your no-till broadcast. We're still looking at conventional till broadcast, but then down there at the bottom, we break it out 3 different ways into 3 different types of strip till, all done with this soil water that's behind us here in this tent. So we look at coulter applied, a stratified shank, and a concentrated shank, and I'll break those out even further here on the next slide here. But for our fertility program, we looked at a typical 200-100 split for Central Illinois, which gives you 75 pounds of phosphorus from MESZ, so we get elemental sulfur, sulfate, and then also a little bit of zinc from that MESZ. And then we're also looking at 60 pounds of MOP within that strip or broadcasted. And then for this trial, we had to do nitrogen, obviously, but with all the different placements, we had to broadcast it over the top in the spring. So we sprayed 175 units of UAN across the surface, and then with an inhibitor, and then let rain come in. And then we were looking at fall versus spring timing with this trial. And our UTC down here at the bottom, for this trial, our UTC was a no-till with nitrogen only control. So we were looking at the value of tillage, fertility, and everything else while comparing it to that UTC. And so how our application points look like here, top left, we have our grower, our broadcasted application. You're placing it on the surface, whether you're no-tilling it, letting rainfall or anything else incorporate it, or if you're conventional till, you're mechanically incorporating it throughout that soil profile there. And then as we work to the top right, we have our coulter application. Our coulter application is set up about 6 inches wide for a strip and then 6 inches down. So we're making a 6x6 box as depicted here with the blue dots that represent fertilizer. The bottom left, we're working to a stratified shank. This is actually a treatment that kind of goes in between the coulter and the concentrated shank that allows us to compare old data to like our past banding data where we're blowing it 6 inches down. So the stratified shank will layer it into the soil as soil tries to fill in the void that knife just went through and broke open. So it's layering it in, soil is falling back in, and then also the fertility at the same time. So we're not getting a true concentrated zone of fertility, it's being placed vertically through that knife slot. And then on the bottom right, we have our concentrated shank. This would be 100% of your fertility down, give or take about an inch, 1.5 inches above your tillage depth here at the bottom of your tillage. So then now, trying to get the reference back to baseball here. So our strike zone here is obviously gonna be what? Strip till. We're gonna be looking at our root zone. So our strike zone here is our red boxes that are gonna be where our roots are to take up that fertility. And as you can see here on the top left, when I'm not gonna try and knock broadcast, but that looks like C.B. Buckner is trying to call a Cubs game. He's calling them high and outside all game long. We're not really getting that fertility within the strike zone. Whereas in strip till on the 3 on the right, we are getting that within that strike zone. And so since this is a fall versus spring trial, obviously we have to look at the weather and just figure out what happened the whole year long. So on November 13th, we went out and did our fall application. Little later, harvest was a little late for us that year. But then actually the point that I want to note or denote here is this blue arrow is pointing to the orange line that is our average daily temperature all the way until middle of January. So in fall of 23 / beginning of 2024, we did not freeze until the middle of January. So what does that mean with our soils? Well, if we're above 40 degrees, 45, our soils are still active. We just put fertility down. What does that mean? Our residues are breaking down still. Our fertility is being fixated or tied up in that soil. And so that does not look good for that fall application point already just because we're active for that long. Then we hit a sharp freeze, then we bring it right back up. So on May 13th, we had our spring application right in between a whole bunch of rainfall. So the blue lines down at the bottom are actually the frequency of the rainfall events and the amounts. So fall or spring of 24 was a little wet for us, trying to do a shank strip till in between 2-inch rains was not good that year. So we were a little bit later than anticipated. And then about a week later, I think on May 21st was where we planted this trial. to give those strips a little bit of time to mellow out. This trial was actually planted in one static hybrid. The hybrid that we picked for this trial was channel 21570, based upon past yield data that we had that it was a fertility responsive hybrid. And so going back to the root zone and the strike zone, we know how big the strike zone should be, but we don't know what's all in that strike zone. The strike zone should be your roots. We're trying to classify that, so we're going to look at root mass in grams. So when we look at the main effect of just fertility alone, as Sam just talked to you, he said that corn tends to like fresh fertility. And as we can see here, versus the fall and spring down here at the bottom, we picked up 1 gram of root mass just by switching our application time. That was a significant increase, and then in the fall, with no P&K, we are building more root mass, probably because that root is trying to search for that fertility in the fall. It didn't have any, it's trying to find it in the soil. So that might be why we're seeing bigger root mass with no P&K in the fall versus the spring. And so moving forward here, we'll look at the strip till treatments. How did they respond? So the Coulter treatment, basically a net wash between fertility and the UTC. But down here we see 2 positive increases in root mass. We see about a 0.6, and then we see a 1.7 gram increase. Now these are in grams. 1.7 doesn't sound like a whole lot. The next slide I'll show you what 1.7 looks like. And then when we look at spring, bring in our UTCs and our fertility, we start to see that we're building a lot bigger of a root mass between tillage treatments moving forward, and all 3 were a positive increase when we added spring fertility. So as we add fertility, as you can see here, 5 of the 6 built bigger root systems by mass. Now mass can be a little confusing. You can have big roots that don't equate the mass, or you can have a lot of small roots that do equate the mass. So what these treatments look like is, here's 2 pictures. The left, these are the same exact treatment. The only difference is fall versus spring. So these are both concentrated shank. One's fall, one's spring with P&K. And as you can see here between the 2 root photos, where we're gaining that mass on that spring shank is in that 6 to 8 inch root zone, all the way down at the bottom. We're still keeping the same amount of roots up high, but that root is starting to grow further down vertically in order to try and find that fertility. So our root observations here just on mass alone. So what we're looking at here is fertility and placement does affect your root mass. The closer you push that P&K fertility timing to your planting time, we are seeing bigger root masses and being able to find that fertility even in that shorter window versus fall. But now the question that we have for our lab, again, like I said, this was a pilot study. We're trying to answer as many questions as we can. How do these placement or fertility affect other root characteristics? Well, I just talked about we had to find how much we had in the strike zone, but now we need to look and see how wide our strike zone is. And how wide that is how we're going to call it on root angle. So here I have root angle broken out between the 3 strip till types. We have Coulter, stratified shank, and actually, to my belief, this is backwards. When you think about a tillage shank, you think that it's a very narrow tillage width. And then when you, like I said with Coulter, it's 6 inches wide by 6 inches down. We're stirring that soil the whole way through that box there. But what we're seeing is that actually the shanks, even though it's a less wide of a tillage strip and intensity of tillage, we are building wider root angles. And so that might be, I talked to Lance this morning about it, a little bit here and there. We might think that the shank is, fracturing that soil, making it more mellow. That root is not seeing resistance, and so it's growing downwards and also outwards in order to try and find that fertility. Whereas the Coulter here, as you can see, the Coulter on the 6x6 box on the left is getting a hold of that fertility. It doesn't have to grow as far to grab that fertility, whereas the concentrated shank here on the right, its strike zone's all the way down at the bottom. It is trying to grow down and also out to find that fertility. So we're getting root mass further on down, but we're also building root angle, trying to find where that fertility is for that root horizontally. And so when we break it out between just fall and spring here, we see that in the fall, as an average, we are building wider roots. Again, that might be a proponent of the roots trying to find that fertility, because in the fall it has more of a chance to be tied up, whether it's P or K, has more of a chance to be fixated within that soil to where that plant can't use it. And so here in the spring, we lost root angle on 2 of the 3 But in the fall, we do see more root angle. We're building wider of a root architecture with our fall fertility. And so obviously the most important part of this trial last year, which didn't get to present on this last year at Crop Phys Day, get to this year, are our grain yields, the most important part. So for our unfertilized, again, we see an untreated control yield of 259. Conventional tillage, we brought it back by about 4 bushels. And then we start looking at our strip till yields. And then the point I want to make here with strip till is that ultimately in the first year of this study, we are not trying to prove that strip till is 40 bushels better. If we are, and that happens, that's great. What we are trying to prove is that strip till is equal than conventional till while also reducing our intensity of tillage. So we're trying to keep the same yield level, but reduce our intensity of tillage and keep that ground cover out there. And so when I bring in the fertility yields here, there is one anomaly up here at the top. We do see the no-till work backwards here on yield. I'll explain that here in a second. But then we do see a fertility response in the strip till, and we also see it in the conventional till. But as you can see here, most of our yield levels for this trial, no matter the placement, are almost the same. So we are keeping that equal thought between conventional tillage and strip till, and making strip till look better because it's reducing the intensity of tillage within your program here. And so the anomaly here is the 259, losing 10 bushels when we added the fall fertility, and then losing even 8 more when we added the spring fertility. But on a positive note, the positive one that we did see was a stratified shank, that one that's layering it vertically in that soil profile. We did increase 11 bushels in the spring. So we are getting the effectiveness of that fertility not being fully concentrated down at the bottom or anything else. And so one of the researcher's worst nightmare here in any research that we ever do is when a grad student has to take lodging ratings. That means something bad happened out of our control, normally the weather. Actually in July of 24, we had 42 mile an hour straight line winds. That also came with 3.5 inches. 215/70, the problem is straight line winds did not treat it very well. So myself, and whoever was bagging for me in the combine, we had to take lodging ratings at harvest. And so at harvest, we took a rating scale of 1 to 10. And how I call lodging was whether or not it was green snapped at the ear leaf or completely gooseneck growing sideways. That's how we distinguish lodging. And so this is a 1 to 10 scale of how much did that plant get affected, or that plot get affected by that wind. And then as we can see here at the top, our no-till, we almost doubled our lodging rating when we added fertility. Could that be because the roots got lazy, didn't need to grow down, didn't have to put as much energy into finding that fertility? We don't know. But then as we work downwards here, the strip till treatments kind of consistently kept our level of lodging at the same. We were a little bit less than conventional till, but we didn't increase it because we're building bigger plants, bigger root system, and everything else that I showed earlier. And so when you lose plants out there, when you have a higher lodging scale, what does that turn into? Obviously, if you green snap, you're going to lose kernel number. And for last year, how I'm going to explain the negative grain yield from no-till unfertilized to fertility is I'm actually going to highlight this. We lost 500 kernels per square meter in the no-till, obviously because we had lodging problems in those no-till plots, and so that's where we lost that yield. You wouldn't think fertility would lose yield, but if we don't have the sheer amount of kernel number, we're going to lose that. And then the one positive that we did get from that stratified shank yield increase was driven by kernel number by about plus 250 here. So we were getting number and also kind of some compensation and everything else from the no-till, but our yields were mainly from number last year. So what did we learn in 2024 is that tillage timing does affect your performance of strip till in East Central Illinois. And then we also learned about the fertility by placement interaction with the roots on how they change. And then it does affect your root development depending on where you place that fertility. And so this was 23 data, 24 data as well. Obviously we're in the year of 2025. We now bringing this further out, everybody in the lab likes to talk and say that when I get a new idea, I hit the ground running. We're throwing all of our resources into strip till here now with my projects. So now this year, instead of 1 static hybrid in this placement study, we're looking at 16. So we're kind of taking our hybrid MIPS that people like to look at, and then we're also adding, we're taking that and adding 16 hybrids to help characterize hybrids on their responses to strip till, or placement, or timing alone. So this year we integrated 16 different hybrids from DeKalb, Golden Harvest, Bex, LG, and Channel within here, trying to get different root packages, so different traits and everything else. But the main thing that I want to point out about this slide here is that these are some of the newest hybrids. You know, some of them were debuted in 2025, some came out last year. Most of these are going to be no more than 3 years old. Why? Because we want to research those hybrids that are going to be grown for 5 or 6 more years. That way we can help be front runners in helping you guys make better decisions for strip till and your hybrid selection. So if we pick a 6-year-old hybrid that might go off the market next year, that doesn't help you guys, doesn't help us. So we're looking at 16 hybrids this year. We also integrated a soybean trial looking at 9 different varieties as well. So trying to figure out what hybrids and varieties will grow on strip till. And then because this is a new trial, we don't have any data on this yet, but I'd like to show a couple examples here. So these are 8 different roots, 4 different hybrids. The only distinction between the two is the top and the bottom. Top is one treatment and the bottom is one treatment, or a different treatment. So at the top here, we have a broadcasted root. So these are 4 different hybrids all under broadcasted fertility in the spring. And then down here at the bottom, we actually have shank strip till roots. And then the key thing that I'd like to point out about these top and bottoms here, is that on the top, I hope it comes out in the TVs with the glare, but the top with the broadcast roots is we're putting a lot more root mass on in that 0 to 2 inches at the top. Why? Because that's where our fertility is with broadcast. And then when we progress down here in the strip till, we start losing that 0 to 2 root mass, but it starts to push roots further down in, trying to find that fertility. So that's the 2 differences between the top and the bottom. And then also here's the 4 hybrids. So 13M31 is a new hybrid for this year. I believe 6344 from Bex is new as well. The DeKalb one is new, and the LG is 2 years old if I remember right. So we're trying to keep new hybrids, trying to classify these, trying to help you guys build better hybrid selection practices for your strip till. And so in 2025, what our hopeful takeaways are from this trial is we're hoping to find rooting structure that we can pick out treatments that will help better select that hybrid. And then what we found from past years is that our rooting structure will vary with the intensity of tillage, depending on Coulter, which is more aggressive, versus the shank, which is less aggressive on your tillage intensity. And that fertility and placement will affect your root development, as we saw by just the angle, by the mass, but then also by the depth. And then lastly, your hybrid should be carefully selected for strip till, largely because of the strike zone. Where you're placing that fertility, you want to obviously have your roots in that strike zone to help pick up that fertility that you're spending the money on for this year in 2025.